was implemented in the U.S. had a similar free trade agreement with Canada. It was called the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, or CFTA. This agreement came into effect under Ronald Reagan in 1989. The CFTA created free trade between Canada and the U.S. It was this agreement that helped create NAFTA. During the late 1980s and the early 1990s, Mexican President Salinas and President George Bush started negotiations that would liberalize trade between Mexico and the United States. Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney knew about these negotiations and asked for a trilateral agreement between the three countries in 1991. This led to the negotiations for NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement was signed on January 1st, 1992, but it did not go into effect until 2 years later on January 1st, 1994. President Bush had signed the agreement, but it was President Clinton's responsibility to make sure it was implemented in the United States. The creation of NAFTA was supposed to boost the American economy and create closer trading ties with Canada and Mexico. As of 2007, Canada and Mexico combined were the two largest markets for American agricultural exports. These two combined were significantly larger than the U.S.'s next 6 export markets. This shows that NAFTA has done what it was supposed to do in the U.S. Farm food exports to Mexico totaled over $11.5 billion in 2007, while they totaled $11.9 billion in Canada for the year of 2006. This most likely would not be the case if this agreement had not been drawn up. Although exports have increased, U.S. imports have increased in the United States. Imports still outnumber them. United States imports seem to be continually growing, but the number of exports from the U.S. to Canada and Mexico have not reached the same level. Because of these differing numbers, there's a trade deficit within the United States that seems to be growing. In 2008, total U.S. exports totaled $412 billion, while imports totaled $555 billion, which means there was a deficit of $143 billion, which was higher than 2007 deficit of $116 billion. Although there is a trade deficit, there is a surplus of services traded. The trade deficit has raised alarm among some people in the United States, and many do not agree with what this agreement has done. Some see it as a failure. It has been shown that exporting goods and services helps us support good job creation, while importing goods and services sends jobs overseas. Because there is such a large difference between the imports entering the United States and the exports leaving, people see this as a reason for job loss in the U.S. Job loss that has increasingly been affecting the middle class. Not only do critics say this agreement has caused job loss, they say it has caused a reduction in people's wages. Some critics even go as far to say that NAFTA has made employers more willing to give jobs to illegal immigrants because it is economically more beneficial to them. Others are against this because they believe it could lead to something called the North American Union, which would be similar to the European Union. While there are naysayers, many people believe NAFTA has had positive impacts on the United States. Along with increased trade growth between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, it has also slightly increased growth and productivity in the United States. They say the trade deficit is no bigger than it would have been without this agreement. They also state that there's only been a minimal effect on the real wage rate. Whether you are for or against NAFTA, it is undeniable that it has had drastic effects on the United States.
Has been mixed. This can especially be seen in Mexico, where NAFTA is credited with both increasing exports and strengthening manufacturing, as well as with the development of a food crisis, poor labor conditions, low economic growth, and the encroachment of transnational corporations, especially in their agricultural sector. After nearly 16 years of NAFTA, Mexico has emerged as an example of how globalization and free trade policies can operate to the detriment of a nation despite, and some would agree because of, an increase of foreign investment and relaxed trade barriers. Of NAFTA's 3 members, Mexico is the least economically developed with a GDP per capita of $14,104 compared with Canada's $35,812 and the US's $45,592. This disparity would seem to indicate that Mexico would have the most to gain from the elimination of trade barriers and tariffs, and to some degree this has been true. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, export of goods from Mexico to the U.S. have seen an increase of $45.8 billion over just the past 3 years. A study done by the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace shows that foreign investment, employment, and productivity have increased since NAFTA went into effect. However, most of this activity can be found in the maquiladoras. Maquiladoras are essentially assembly plants in which an unfinished product is imported, assembled, and then re-exported. Transnational corporations seeking to take advantage of Mexico's lower wages and less stringent labor laws established most maquiladoras near the U.S. border. Conditions in the maquiladoras are often less than ideal. Hours are long and workers obtain low wages with no benefits. Also, according to the report, the minimum wage paid to those in the maquiladoras has decreased by 25%. Transnational corporations with plants in Mexico include Fisher-Price, Honda, IBM, and Xerox, to name just a few. Many people have been forced into poverty or maquiladoras due to another aspect of NAFTA in Mexico, privatization. Large portions of the agricultural sector have been privatized. Small-scale independent farmers cannot compete with large agribusinesses. In addition, corporations like Cargill are major buyers of Mexico's staple food product, corn. Cargill has a practice of buying and stockpiling corn, along with other similar transnational corporations, has taken over the industry. They have been accused of speculation and price hikes that have contributed to Mexico's recent food crisis. The problems can be seen as a direct result of NAFTA. Prior to NAFTA, Mexico's grain industry was under the control of Consupo, the national company for popular subsistence. After NAFTA, the industry was privatized and power over corn production, exportation, importation, and processing landed in the hands of groups like Cargill and the Myseca Group. As the world economy becomes more globalized, Mexico may face threats from the very processes that brought them the only growth they have seen as a result of NAFTA. Transnational corporations are now looking to China as a source for even cheaper labor and production. And as reported by the New York Times, foreign direct investment declined by $8.6 billion, while overall production dropped by 45% in the last few years. The inaction of Mexican officials is also contributing to the current economic slump. Gerardo Esquivel, an economist at the Colegio de Mexico, has stated that we have an economy that has atrophied because of the lack of reform. If Mexico is to maintain its economy and achieve any kind of growth, it will need to acknowledge the shortcomings of the NAFTA agreement and make the appropriate changes.